Today's guest is a professor of psychology at Amherst College who speaks regularly for public and corporate audiences on topics that I love, such as the science of happiness, the power of emotional intelligence, the art of aging well, and the psychology of courage and inaction. She's an author of several books, including Positive Shift, Mastering Mindset to Improve Happiness, Health, and Longevity. Her goal in the Positive Shift book is to provide science-based strategies people can use to improve the quality and longevity of their lives. Welcome to the Motivation Show, Catherine A. Sanderson.
Thank you so much for this invitation to talk. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, I think we're going to have a lot of fun because we're two psychology majors. As I mentioned off the air, you've taken that a little bit further than I have, studying your profession. I still use the psychology, but, in different professions. And so, you know, positive, optimistic thoughts don't come easily to me is a quote that you actually have mentioned in your book. You actually say that you have to work for your happiness. So I'm curious, how would you rate your own happiness most of the time on a scale of 1 to 10?
So, what's interesting is that you're asking me that question now, and I would say I'm probably like at a 7 or 8, like right now in general in my life. But if you had asked me that question a decade ago, I probably would have said 3. I mean, it would have been significantly lower.
Well, as we both know, that happiness is not a permanent state. It shifts constantly. So, what you were 5 minutes ago is not necessarily your state of happiness today. And so, I think I'm a lot like you. I get up in the morning, I'm very, very, excited and positive, but sometimes, unfortunately, I let the crazy part of my head, worry a little too much, and maybe I'm a little too harsh on myself, maybe a little too perfectionistic. So it's even an ongoing struggle even though I've talked to many, happiness and positivity experts, I think, unless you're that rare cat that just happens to just, be like, oh my God, life's great, wonderful. Oh no, I don't care. I have stage 4 cancer. I'm beating that, we're still it's a lifelong learning process. So tell me about your thoughts about just happiness in general, and what you think that people can do who are, kind of really struggling on that lower end of the scale where they might be rating themselves like a 5 or a 3.
Yeah. So, first of all, I love the example that you just shared because I think that many people think, some people are happy, some people are not happy. And it's absolutely true. There are people that are like, hey, I've got stage 4 cancer and I'm going to beat it and, everything's great. But for many people who are not naturally happy, me, sounds like you, what the science now says is that there are things that we can do to work on our happiness. So basically, we have to practice happiness or we have to exercise our happiness muscle. And to me, that's the most important finding from the field of positive psychology. There are specific steps that we can all take no matter where we fall on that natural happiness continuum to increase our happiness.
You had mentioned also in your book about a study from researchers in the field of positive psychology, and they gave a bunch of examples of things that a lot of us do, or most of us do, that may not actually turn out to be as good as it seems at the time that we're doing it. Of course, social media is one of those biggies. We're all on Facebook, at least most of us, not everybody. But, tell us why. The research shows that spending a lot of time on Facebook might make us a little bit more sadder and lonelier than we anticipated.
Yeah, this is one of the sort of saddest findings to me as a person who studies psychology, but also as the mom of 3 young adults, that what the research, and of course, the young adults do spend a lot of time on Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever. That one of the challenges with spending a lot of time on social media is that you are doing constant comparisons of all these other people. And these other people look really happy and really fit and really pretty and really wealthy and really successful. And it can make you feel like your own life just doesn't measure up. That sort of famous expression by Teddy Roosevelt, comparison is the thief of joy.
Well, those Arnold Schwarzenegger biceps, when I see those on social media, I mean, come on, how do you beat that?
You're selling yourself short.
Yeah, but it's really true because I look on there a lot, and sometimes I last night I got off there and I'm like, oh my God, look at everybody, everybody's like got the perfect tan and everybody's on vacation, where do they get the 2 weeks, perfect sand on the beach, the water's perfectly blue, everything is just like so perfect, but those are sound bites, right?
Right. No, and I think what's so important is that when we look at people's social media, we think of it as like an autobiographical rendition of their life. And what we're not realizing is they might be on that, beautiful beach, but what we're not seeing is that they have bed bugs in their hotel, or the hotel lost their luggage, or they're fighting with their kids, or they're jet lagged, et cetera. And we're not seeing that stuff because most of us don't post that on social media.
So another one of those interesting things in the research are about medicine. We all know that, well, not all of us, but we should know by now that you can just buy generic ibuprofen and it basically is supposed to be acting the same way as the Motrin. But in actuality, the expensive brand name medicines, often will provide better pain relief than the generic stuff, even though they share the same ingredients. And there's a good reason for it. So maybe you can share that.
Yeah, so this is one of the most fascinating findings, really, from neuroscience, which is about the placebo effect and the power of expectation. So, if we expect, oh, I'm taking this pain medication and it's really expensive and it's the name brand, that's really going to work great. That belief actually leads that medicine to work better only because we have this expectation that it will. And that's the power of the placebo effect. It's really about what our expectations are.
Now, will it work in reverse, where if you think the generic is going to outperform or perform just as well as the other, you'll get just as good a results or better results?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, fascinating. And so, one of the biggies, and I've been guilty. Oh my God, I can hear some of the people saying, "Yes, you too." So I'm already admitting to it before I'm getting into this subject. The cell phone, sitting on that table. Tell us about that. What does that do?
Right. So this is such an important finding for all of us who are, wedded to our phones. And what this research shows is that the mere presence of a cell phone on a table, even if it's turned off, even if it's not even your phone, it's the researcher's phone, just the mere presence of a phone, even turned off on a table, so it's not going to ring or vibrate, leads to lower quality of conversations, less intimate, less vulnerable, etc. And so what that finding really tells us is if you're trying to have a good conversation with a friend or a romantic partner or a colleague, put away the phone. Out of sight, out of mind. Put it in your bag, put it in your purse, put it in your desk drawer, because the mere presence of that cell phone pulls our attention in ways that hurts our in-person interactions.
Yeah, I can see why people might get annoyed, when you feel like, something maybe they're just not that important to you, so that, therefore you have the cell phone there just in case you get bored. Yeah, I can see why that would be a little bit of a turn off.
Oh, true.
So, so one of my favorite ones, is about patients in a hospital room. Where a view of nature will help them recover faster. Now, I interviewed Dr. Bernie Siegel on my podcast. I also had him many years ago in my seminar company speaking, and he wrote a classic book called Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And there's a lot of truth to really the fact that, hopefully you're going to rely on more than just medicine, and the doctors, because you're going to need that extra little push and help. And so it just makes so much sense that if you got this positive imagery around you, probably going to create more endorphins in your body. That's from my perspective. You're the expert. Tell us about that.
So, this is one of the earliest studies to demonstrate the power of nature. And what the study found is that patients in a hospital whose room overlooked a park, so they weren't in the park, but they were just looking at the park through their window, actually recovered faster from surgery. They got out of bed faster. They needed lower levels of pain medication. They had better reports from the nurses. And I think most importantly, they got discharged faster from the hospital. So that study was one of the first to reveal the profound importance for both psychological and physical well-being of simply having a view of nature. And the thing that I love about that study, of course, is that we can all recreate this in our daily lives, right? We can have house plants. We can try to have a view of nature from our window at work or at home. We can spend time on our lunch hour after work, just taking a little walk through a park. All of that makes us feel better.
Well, the last one here is a real biggie because you talk about people with positive expectations about aging, and I think the majority of us have all these negative images because, when we think of aging, we see images of people with Alzheimer's and all kinds of cancers and all kinds of problems. And, it's like it doesn't look like things get better. It always looks like things get worse. And yet there's those few that can actually think about aging. And I've talked to people in their 80s, 90s. I even just interviewed a woman, 101 years old. And I got to tell you, boy, she is a firecracker and she's so positive and her expectations about aging are not negative. So,
Mhm.
but 7.5 years, we live longer, 7.5 years if we have that better, a positive expectation. Tell us how we get all those extra years.
Right. So this is one of the most sort of practically important findings. And that is that when you look at people who are in their 40s and 50s and you ask them, what are your expectations about aging? Many people, as you noted, have negative expectations. Oh, I'm going to be, feeble. I'm going to be absent-minded. I'm not going to be able to exercise or be as mobile. But people who have those negative expectations, it actually plays out and hurts them in terms of longevity. People like, I assume, that 101-year-old woman who you interviewed, who have positive expectations about aging. I'm going to have more wisdom. I'm going to have more free time. I'm going to have grandchildren, or this ability to choose how I spend my days. And I'm going to be mentally alert and physically active. Having those positive expectations actually is associated with an increased life expectancy of 7.5 years, even when researchers take into account other factors like whether you smoke, whether you're obese, whether you drink alcohol, and so on. So it's really important for all of us to start focusing on what is good about getting older.
So in chapter one, mindset matters. I love that. I've named my show the Motivation Show. Mindset matters. Keep it simple and profound. We talk about our happiness in daily life, and that it's and the state of our physical health is really determined by external factors rather than the things that that happen otherwise. And so, actually, I'm sorry, it's the opposite. It's controlled by the way we think about it, not by the external factors.
Yeah.
A little
Well,
discombobulated there.
it's really how we think about the external
How we
factors,
think
right?
about it,
How
exactly.
we think about, right?
And so, I was talking to somebody recently, and he said, if I had your money, he said, I would be so much more successful. And boy, first of all, I don't know how he saw my bank account, but I had to lecture him a little bit in a positive way that, there's an awful lot of examples of people who didn't start with money. And money is not really, I was telling him, it's basically in your mindset. And I said, unless you change that mindset, you're going to stay where you are for the rest of your life because you think that you're too short, you're too tall, you don't have enough money, you don't have this, you don't have enough that. It all starts in in your mind. Your mindset controls everything. But we're so, we grow up believing that, and we're almost, it's propaganda, that, where we live and the color of our skin and all these other things really are the determining factors. So maybe you can speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, so I love that question, and frankly, I love your thoughtful read of my book. So thank you for that as well. But I think one of the keys is exactly what you're noting, that we have this expectation that I will be happy when, and maybe that's when I get a raise, or maybe when I make this amount of money, or maybe when I move to this bigger house, or I drive a fancier car, or whatever. We have this expectation that I will be happy when, and that really is this assumption that these external factors about what we look like. Maybe it's I'll be happier when I lose 10 pounds or, whatever it is, instead of focusing on being happy in yourself, being happy in terms of your thoughts and your perspective about the world. And to me, that's really the most important practical takeaway about the power of mindset.
One of the things that I think I struggle with, and I think probably the majority of the world struggles with, is when bad things happen. There was a great book written by Dr. Harold Kushner, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. But the reality is bad things happen to all of us. It's just different times and different degrees. But, we're going to have, as a rabbi once said, bittersweet life. We're going to have the good, we're going to have the bad, and nobody escapes it. And so when we have these terribly difficult circumstances, I believe you talked in your book about the power of mental shortcuts. Can you tell us how that might help us in those turbulent times?
So, one of my favorite findings from the research in positive psychology is about the power of something called post-traumatic growth. So, we hear all the time in society about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's so bad to have, traumatic things happen. But what the research shows is that tragic things, difficult things, whether that's, getting divorced or losing a loved one or having a scary health diagnosis or a miscarriage or whatever, that getting fired, personal or professional things, all of those negative adverse events have the opportunity to let us do something called post-traumatic growth. And that means that we often grow and learn and change in really important ways from the experience of difficult events. So as your rabbi noted, it's really important to recognize that moments are bittersweet because they are bitter, but they also are sweet. And we have the opportunity to face tragedy and loss by thinking about what we have gained and not just what we have lost.
So you talk about in your book, according to one study, that midlife adults who hold negative beliefs about aging report having less interest and less enjoyment of even sex itself. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So basically, if you have negative expectations about aging, it kind of is like cast a pall over like everything, right? So it means that you have less enjoyment of your relationships. It means you have less enjoyment of sexual activity. It means that you have more anxiety about going to the doctor or having a health event, et cetera, because you have this expectation, things are getting worse, and so on, instead of saying, oh, I'm getting older, I'm getting wiser, I'm still going to be able to do all the different things that I love, maybe with some kind of modifications, but I can keep being physically active.
So if you actually feel older, regardless of your chronological age, you actually even talk about they're also especially likely to report having negative beliefs about sex. Tell us how just the thought of you feeling older does that.
Yeah. So, what the research seems to suggest is that people who have negative beliefs about their chronological age, so this is how old I feel, not how old I am, but this is how old I feel, actually report lower levels of sexual desire, lower levels of sexual frequency, and probably they feel less good about their bodies, less good about being intimate with someone else. And again, it's not about how old you are, it's about how old you think you are.
And you also talk about using mental tricks to influence our behaviors in positive ways. What kind of little secrets or tricks or whatever you want to terminology you want to use? How do we just use those things in a positive way, turn things
Yeah,
around?
so you actually noted a comment earlier about pain relievers. And so what I sort of joke with people and say is you should buy the, expensive bottle of, Advil or Tylenol or et cetera, and you should use that once and then just keep that bottle and keep refilling it with the cheap stuff. So
Ooh,
that
I
way,
like that.
right? Isn't that, so that's like one of
Yeah.
my,
We're,
it's like a
we're looking at it like it's Motrin,
exactly.
So,
You just need
yeah.
to buy it once. Just buy it
Mental
once
trick.
and then just keep refilling.
Mm.
So, but that's again the power of the placebo. We have this expectation: if we pay more for a bottle of wine, we think it tastes better. That's the same sort of examples. And one of the most interesting studies found that if you tell somebody that they're eating something that's low in calories, which many of us who watch our weight, try to do, when you eat something that you believe is low in calories, it actually increases a hormone in your body that tells you you need to eat more. It increases feelings of
Mm.
hunger because your brain has been told, oh, this is a diet food. And so, what that finding would suggest, frankly, is that there's an unintended negative effect of eating so-called low-calorie foods because you know that it's low calorie, and therefore your body's like, well, I didn't have enough to eat, I'm hungry. Whereas having like a smaller portion of a high-calorie brownie tells your brain, oh, I'm having a nice high caloric brownie, I'm no longer hungry. And it actually shuts down that drive.
I think that's a whole book right there, how to trick our brain into, having us
Changing our
live
diet.
healthier,
Yeah, yeah,
happier,
100%.
get more money, more success, more everything.
Or
It's
sex. Yeah.
fascinating. So, I want to talk a little bit about expectations and how they create our reality. So I go back to when I was a kid, I used to play baseball, and the times when I was really like pumped up and really positive, I seemed to always, hit a home run or two. And then the times when I was like, oh my God, if I miss this ball, we're going to lose the game. It seemed like I missed the ball. Tell us about why that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. I actually just finished teaching for my spring semester a course in sports psychology. And many of the things that I talk about in this book, which of course is not a book about sports, in fact, those are really illustrated in how they play out in terms of athletics. That people who believe, oh, I'm in a hitting slump, I'm not going to hit that, actually perform less well. If you tell people in the lab, oh, you got the lucky golf ball, this ball has been so successful. If you just tell people that, they actually putt better than if they're told, ooh, too bad, you got the ball that has not been so lucky. People aren't really doing well with this ball. So again, as you remember experiencing in your own earlier career as an athlete, our expectations about how we're going to perform athletically play out in precisely that same way.
It's interesting because it also plays out in business because if you get anxiety about not getting the account, um, somehow you end up not getting the account, and somehow the person on the other end seems to pick up your anxiety when you're just relaxed about it, and you have that give off the impression that I'll be perfectly fine if you do business with me or not. Somehow that seems to be attractive to the other side, and somehow things just organically happen better. Same thing happens with speaking when you get on stage there and you start like worrying about I'm going to flub up. They say you should actually just focus on the other people, not on yourself. Focus on the people, focus on doing the right thing for the people in the audience. And I know when I've done that, it seems that, I'm less anxiety and because I speak in front of people all the time. So whenever I get into my own head, that's where the problems lie.
Mhm. One of my favorite examples from research that I describe in the book is about how we can shift how we think about anxiety provoking things, such as giving a speech. And what that research shows is that most people think about stressful events as anxiety provoking. This is going to be debilitating. I'm so worried. But if instead you can think about that anxiety and arousal as invigorating, challenging, energizing, you actually perform better. So what I love about that finding is that really it's saying, we're going to feel the same. We're just going to think about what it means, not as, oh, I'm about to choke, but, oh, I'm really energized and alert. And people who have that shift in their mindset about how they interpret arousal or anxiety perform better.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of famous actors, actresses, singers, they still have anxiety. I've asked them, and they say I have anxiety all the time. They just learned how to use it in a more positive way and lift themselves up. They're used to it. They understand it. They don't let it control themselves. That kind of goes back, into my next topic, which is fear, which is always a big, 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 big topic. And it goes back to probably the late 1990s when I flew in a lady who wrote the definitive book on fear, at least for that time, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, Dr. Susan Jeffers. And, often I'll just think about that title. When I'm in a tough situation, I'll just like to feel the fear. You're not necessarily going to eliminate it, but feel it and, acknowledge it and just do it anyway. So talk about that a little bit and how we can work with our fears because we all seem to have them.
Yeah, so this really goes back to the thought about mindset. What is driving our fear and how do we really interpret it? One of the chapters in my book is called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's actually the title of a book by a neuroscientist, Robert Sapolsky at Stanford. And I used that his title of the book as my chapter title because it really illustrates what the research says. When zebras show physiological arousal, it's because they are literally in a life or death situation. They're being chased, by a lion or a tiger. Humans show that fear arousal all the time in non-life or death situations. I'm late for my plane. I'm giving a speech. I have a job interview. I have a blind date, whatever it is. So being able to think about, okay, I'm feeling this fear. I'm feeling this anxiety. What is this really? Is this really life or death or is it not? Actually helps us adopt a more positive mindset about stress.
Yeah, it's funny how we often think that if we lose a job or if, even something small like we lose a sale, oh my God, my life's going to be over. Like we overreact as if we're being chased by lions, like we're in such stress mode, and unfortunately, it takes sometimes 2020 quarterbacking later on to realize how silly we were in the moment. Crazy. Um, so, you know, one of your chapters is Secrets of Centenarians. And as I mentioned to you before, I interviewed a 101-year-old. She's rolling, probably going to write a book pretty soon. Uh, keep posted on that one. That's going to be really interesting. So tell us a little bit about mindset and longevity. How could we, live to a ripe old age of 100 plus, happy and relatively
Oh,
healthy?
right. So, there are some really key findings from the literature. One, of course, we've already talked about having a positive mindset about aging. With age comes wisdom, not, with age comes dementia or whatever. Another key factor is people who are older find ways of making contributions and giving purpose to their lives. So that could be they volunteer, that could be they serve important roles in their community, in their neighborhood, they write a book, whatever it is. Three, they stay active physically. So they keep moving, they keep doing things, whatever that is. And one of the most important findings is they are socially integrated. So obviously people who are, in their 90s, 100s, have lost loved ones, maybe lost a spouse or romantic partner, but they are integrated with family members, with friends, with neighbors, with their community. What we find is that social isolation, loneliness is actually really deadly. So finding ways of giving yourself purpose, staying active, but also being integrated into your community is really essential.
When I was younger, I seemed to have done pretty well in school, but there was one thing, unfortunately, Catherine, that I didn't do too well in, and it wasn't even a course. It was something called initiative. I didn't even know how to pronounce it at the time. Like, what is that word? Like, I'm a 7-year-old kid. And then I realized, that was really about me sitting in the back of the room, not wanting to be called on and never volunteering anything. And always the only time I spoke was when I was asked a question, rather than volunteering, which, always that annoying, excited kid in the front of the room was always like, call on me, teacher, call on me. You kind of hated that person. Oh my God, but you also wish you were that person. Like, I wish I was more outgoing like that. And so, that goes to taking risks and chances. Shy people tend to, I think, maybe not take as many risks. And I was probably a little more shyer than I would like to have been back then. So tell us about taking chances and more risk. What does that do for you when you actually take more risks?
Well, I've got to say, you clearly overcame that lack of initiative because now you have a podcast.
Yeah, this
So,
is taking a big risk.
right, I was going to say it's like the opposite of like sitting in the back,
Right,
like
exactly.
you're sitting here. So that story actually illustrates the power of change, right? The power of change. So when you ask people what you regret, and everybody, of course, has regrets in life, but what's interesting is that people tend to regret things they didn't do more than things they did do. So psychologists call that regrets of inaction haunt us. I wish I told that person I liked them. I wish I'd applied for that job. I wish I'd gone for that promotion, whatever. And people actually don't experience so much regret about things they do. And that might be because once you've done something, you've learned something from it. Maybe it went well, maybe it went poorly, but you learned some lesson. When you failed to do something because you were scared, you're always sort of left haunting of, I wonder, I wish I had, I wonder what would have happened. Would that have made a difference? And those haunts are really hard.
Well, I think Frank Sinatra sang about it, right? Regrets. I've had a few. I think it was one of the verses in one of his songs. And I think that might be one of the most important lessons in all of life is don't wait 20 years from now and then, look back and, when you're no longer maybe physically able to do the same things that you could do, just go ahead and do it now. If you have to err on the side of one way or the other, usually it's better off erring on the sides of doing something because there's a far smaller percentage of people who regret the things that they actually did that failed. Even if you failed, there's that famous expression like, where it's like, you're better to have tried and failed than never to have tried at all. And in my life, I would have to say that I'm a poster boy for that. Even with the failures that I've had, I actually look back now and I realize that those are good things for me because then I can actually realize that I had guts. And the worst thing for me is to feel that I didn't have the guts to have made the effort. So it's okay to have failed because in order to make great successes, you have to fail along the way. So really, really important lesson on that. So anything else that you'd like to share in general that you'd like the audience to know where you feel people can live a better and a happier life?
So I guess the only other thing that I'd add is that, many people struggle to find happiness and many people sort of feel like, well, I'm not wealthy enough or successful enough or, whatever it is. And what I want people to know is that there are specific strategies that everyone can take to increase their happiness. And what it involves is deciding that you want to be happy, deciding that you deserve to be happy, and then really deciding that you're willing to make choices in your life about how you spend your time, energy, and effort. But everyone who's listening to this who feels like, man, I'm kind of here and I wish I were a little bit happier, the most important thing to know is that there are specific things you can do. And I hope everyone listening who feels like that will take some time to make choices to feel better, because we all benefit from living in a world with more happiness.
And what was really powerful, what you said is we make the choices to feel better. Again, it's not like, okay, it's raining outside or the political climate is not great, because so many people are so like paranoid about the political climate. And you don't have to let any of that bother you. It's all just how you decide to interpret that. But so many people think that if it's the wrong person in office, they're going to have to leave the country. And there's some very famous people who did leave the country, but I'm not sure their life's better because they did that. They think that it is. And I think a lot of that is self-delusion. That's my personal feeling. So, we could live a very happy life despite crazy circumstances. There's great examples of motivational speakers, no arms, no legs. I can think of one in particular, and he's amazing. This guy, Nick, no arms, no legs, and he's a happy guy, and he has no excuses. He doesn't let that, get him down. And so if he can do what he does with no arms and no legs, think about what most of us can really do. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. Now, I understand that you did write a new book, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Maybe we'll come back on another podcast and talk about that book.
Sure. So I do have a new book called Why We Act. And this is really about what inhibits people from speaking up in different kinds of situations. I'd love the opportunity to come back. But I will also say, more relevant for our conversation, I have a free Substack, absolutely free newsletter that goes out every Thursday called How to Feel Better. And it's 500 words, a little story, a little science, a photo. And anyone who's really interested in kind of taking some steps to improve happiness in their own lives, subscribe free. How to Feel Better, sandersonspeaking.com.
I'll be subscribing. I can't wait. I'm always learning. And thank you so much, Catherine. You've been amazing today.
I really enjoyed our conversation. And again, more happiness in the world is good for us all. So I hope everyone here will take that step to making themselves a little bit happier after this conversation.
Amen. I'm all in for happiness. Thank you.
Take care.